Exceptional Marcus Pearce.
Rockstar Damien Christoph.
The Wellness Summit is almost upon us and we have so many prizes and giveaways before the summit even begins this year, MP.
That's right, Damo. There's a very exciting Facebook giveaway running this week only over at the Wellness Couch. One of our new exhibitors at this year's summit is Solid Technics cast iron and beautiful non-stick cookware. And they are giving away over $400 in prizes to one lucky Wellness Couch listener.
All you need to do is go to the Wellness Couch's Facebook page and follow the prompts. The lucky winner will also receive a double pass to this year's Wellness Summit, September 10-11 at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. How cool is that?
So go check out the Wellness Couch on Facebook to enter, and remember to immerse yourself in 16 hours of powerhouse wellness with Damo, myself and over 40 other health and wellness experts. Go to thewellnesssummit.com and enter the code SOLIDSUMMIT for $100 off your ticket before they sell out.
That's thewellnesssummit.com.
TheWellnessCouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today we are discussing the topic of the mother-in-law clash. And
it's a juicy one.
Yeah, it is. And the reason we actually came about this was that in our private Facebook group for our Loathing to Loving course that's just coming to an end, there were these most fantastic and in-depth conversations around the mother-in-law, because the mother-in-law often offers the greatest amount of pain.
Yes.
And when we're talking about taking everything inward, not outward, the greatest amount of pain. And the hardest way to kind of really do the hard work that we were calling women into to really shift these perspectives and dynamics and gain the gold out of them. And that's hard. That's, takes a lot of going back into so many things. What that mirror represents for you, where that perception and those labels have come from in your life. What are the beliefs that you've picked up in your childhood that associate with you having that? What are your voids? What are your values? It's just such a loaded topic, and the more kind of ferocity you have emotionally triggered by someone, the deeper that wound kind of is.
Yeah, the more, kind of emotional and passionate you are about something, the more lopsided your perceptions are, the more you're unable to see the perfection and the balance.
Yes.
And that was what this was really calling everyone in the course into seeing.
And how painful to see the other side when you've spent a whole life and a whole lot of story around it being this one version of reality.
Yeah, you basically spent years stacking up evidence to say that their way is wrong, or that they are this or that, or not this or not that.
Yes.
And don't meet your children's needs or your needs, or, didn't parent your husband the way that they should have, all of that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing was that the outer form, the outer reasoning of why these relationships were problematic, or why this person was this in their life, were so often kind of surface level niggly things, but underneath that, which is what we're going to go into, was just like this massive gaping stuff,
wasn't it?
Yeah, like the synchronicity between what this mother-in-law represents and then what the void was for this course participant in her own childhood.
Yes.
You could just see, you couldn't have. You really saw the divine intervention in this relationship coming about, because it was really making up for what was deeply missing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And actually that happened for a couple. There was another woman in there who also had an amazing experience on the other side of this work with her mother-in-law. So essentially we thought the responses that we had from both these women around, once they'd done the process of some of this work, to be in the room with this same woman and have a completely different love bomb, gratitude, incredible shifting of dynamics within this relationship, when the mother-in-law had done nothing different.
Yeah, which is funny, right? Because so often we think that person has to change in order for us to love them.
Yes.
But the truth is, you simply need to change your perception of somebody so that they can become who you now love.
Yes.
And this is what the process does. But, we recognise that, for so many listeners who are listening to this, you probably got these feelings coming up in your body perhaps yourself around what triggers you with your own mother-in-law. So I would say to you, observe those, because there's so much to learn from that. And so we're hoping that this podcast might give you some things to reflect on too.
Yes, we are. So where do you want to start with this one, Bridget? Should we start with the mirror and perception, or you want to start somewhere else?
Yeah, let's start with, well, I think maybe let's ease it in with values, because I think
that's a good idea.
That's often the big thing that we as mothers clash with our mother-in-laws on, is the different values we might bring to parenting of our children.
So remember, values, everyone has a different set of things that are really important to them. Yeah. The things that make a meaningful life, a meaningful day for you, and they're different for everybody.
Yeah.
So values underpin the choices you make, the way you perceive a thing, and what you seek in this world. So different values. Now lead on.
Yeah, so if you, for instance, value really hearing your child, really being present to them, perhaps not forcing them to do anything they don't want to do, and perhaps your mother-in-law is a bit more old school in the sense that, kids need to be seen and not heard, and kids need to do what they're told, and adults make the rules. And
there's shaming around emotion.
Yeah, she said that, and that's a big one.
That was a huge one for me.
My whole
like,
don't cry and come on.
Yeah, but not yes, but just it wasn't quite so blatant as that. I suppose the two things I remember really struggling with were no space held for tears or emotion. So I was stop being a suki la la, which used to set me off big time. And the other one was distraction. So the second there were tears, it was, what can I give you? An icy polar lolly, a toy, to make it stop.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling deeply wounded by those things, because I perceived my husband being incredibly emotionally shut down, and the whole family dynamic was sweeping things under the rug.
And for you, that was just showing the dots and going, aha, look, this is how it starts.
Yes. Look how you've messed your son up. You're not doing it to my kids. I had this whole story around it, which was my story, right? And so deeply painful for me to witness likely what my story was underneath all that. That was the void, the pain that was running the choices that I wanted to make it different. But we all have these sorts of connections, is really the point I'm trying to make.
And what ends up happening is that often when their approach is so different to yours, you become even more resolute in your approach being the right way, and you will look for evidence, you'll read, you'll research, you'll talk to people to shore up your own sense that you're right, which creates that void and that division even more so.
Yes.
Because you need to feel confident that your way is the right way, because you feel so undermined.
Why do you think we do that we constantly seek for validation of what is our perceived right way?
I think it helps us to govern ourselves in the life we want to live, because it makes us feel more certain. And when
more
we feel
fervent.
and when we feel uncertain, you can feel really wishy-washy and unsure of your direction.
What your place is.
Yeah, but certainly it's the way the brain works, right? So we always want to have evidence that our way is the right way, and that our path is the right path, because as soon as you have uncertainty, you become less clear, foggy, you waver, you become more susceptible to other people's opinions and injected beliefs. So there's a whole host of reasons why we do that. But from a relationship point of view, unless we're willing to see what they're actually offering us for our own growth, all that will create breakdown in those relationships, because you're looking to disown everything that you see in that person, and everything that you label them as this way. You're basically saying you are not.
Yes, so which leads into mirror and perception. So let's maybe just quickly take it back to values. And what we asked the women in our group to look at was, okay, so there's a clashing in the form here, but can you see underlying that is actually the same basic value of family or parenting or love?
Because simply, so often when we have our view of the right way to do things, and, for some people it might be that, you feed your child organic whole food meals, or, you don't let your child watch too much TV. And so to do the antithesis of those things, so to give your child McDonald's and Coke and let them watch TV all day, in your mind would be like child abuse, right?
Yeah.
So what this is getting you to see is, in fact, that, well, that's just a different set of values. So they might express their love through maybe making their child have a really fun morning out at McDonald's with, the play equipment and whatever. And to you, that's abhorrent. But to them, they don't have the value on nutrition, but they have a value on connection. But you're not willing to see that because you are so polarized against the big elephant in the room, which is the McDonald's, for example. And so that's what we're really wanting to dive into, to say, okay, you see that they are this, but where are they not that? Like, where are they still expressing love, but in a different form than what you see love as being? Because it's still there. It's just not in the way that you see it should be. And that was one of the big kind of light bulb moments, wasn't it?
It was one of the huge light bulb moments for both those women, to see that what they perceived to be different or negative parenting patterns were actually the same value to the same extent that they had. So they both these mums in our group and their mother-in-laws both had family as a really top value. Just the form in which that came in, the expressed form that same value came in, looked different, and in fact called each side of that, the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law in that, to own the bigger spectrum of what that value actually is, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's worthwhile breaking this down to make it more specific, because I understand we're talking kind of very vaguely in terms of confidentiality here.
Yeah.
So maybe if we brought it back to ourselves. So this work actually created huge ripples for me with my relationship with my mother-in-law, and what I used to judge as really, well, as I said to you before, the repressed emotion. What else? She used to make them do jobs. She could never play with them, so they always would run around doing jobs and tasks and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I used to think, you only see them one freaking day, like in however long. Surely you can play with them in that time. But so this is the same value of family, but expressed in two very... And I had a huge value on nutrition. She had no really value on food at all. But what I realised was, when I looked at this, was that we both had exactly the same intensity of value on family. But my version of connection, even though it was exactly the same intensity, looked different to her version of connection. And if you're looking at the, set of piano keys, I was at one end and she was at the other. Now, that doesn't mean that my version of connection was better or more detrimental to my kids. Same as it doesn't mean her version of connection was better than mine or more detrimental than what I'd perceived mine to be. What I realised was it gave them equal access to more.
It actually helped them become more whole because they're getting the balance.
Which is huge, right? Because we can build this whole story up around how we need to protect them from these people because we perceive that they take away, when in actuality they add more in, because kids learn and have access to genius from these very intimate relationships who love them equally to, my perceived value on family, but express it differently. So they don't just get my polarized version of what love or connection looks like. They all of a sudden get this whole world perspective on what love and connection looks like. And in that, they get access to my genius and they get access to her genius. Now, she doesn't have less genius than me, just it's different. And in fact, total opposite to mine, which is perfect for my kids.
Absolutely.
Right?
And a great example too is, if some of the biggest charges that can come up, particularly if you value, conscious parenting and you perceive that your mother-in-law doesn't, if your big trigger is that she's not giving my children a chance to be heard or, really hearing them in their emotions, okay, well, where is she hearing them? Because chances are, if you're super focused on nutrition or conscious parenting or whatever, yes, you might be hearing your kids in one form, but you're also
ignoring them in another.
You might be injecting your values of how things should be onto your children instead of listening to your children and what their lives are expressing is their value. So, I might be spending all this time preparing these nutritious meals when really what my son would love is for me to go and play Lego with him for an hour. Yeah. But that's not... And that would be hearing him, in his view. And my mother-in-law does that a lot quicker than I do. Yeah. So that's a bit humbling, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it interesting?
So it gets us to get off our soapbox a bit.
Yes.
And equilibrate Our perception of how we think things should be, or what is right or wrong.
And of them in the process of that. And of seeing that if our top value is our family or our children, seeing how in actual fact we're limiting them by not allowing them access to the full spectrum.
Yeah.
Because even if...
And to those relationships, independent of the projections or the views that we think they should look like.
Yes,
to
that's
allow
right.
them to blossom within their own entity, as opposed to us needing to interfere, because it's a relationship between them, and an unfolding of a bit of a dance, between the mother-in-law or the grandmother and the child.
Yes.
It doesn't always need our interference.
No, and they learn so well. Like, you would all know this, right? That kids learn really well how to respond and adapt to settling by mum or settling by dad, or how to, in inverted commas, behave or not behave around mum versus dad versus grandma. They get incredibly creative experiences in learning how to create win-wins depending on who they're in front of.
And they learn the art of communication, which is the ultimate life skill.
Yes. And that all those things you perceive take away from your child is your perception based on your void. So likely the fact that it's a trigger for you is actually your inner child work, because that will be your inner child that's getting triggered by that. But remember, your child has a completely different life experience to you, completely different set of perceptions and wounds, and therefore completely different set of voids in the way that they view that same situation. So, I have this whole story on bullying and isolation, but that doesn't mean that if my daughter and I were in the playground and some kid said something hideous and you can't play with me, I would be deeply wounded. But just as likely, my daughter wouldn't be, because she doesn't have my void.
Yeah.
So this is the thing.
How often do we project our own wounding onto our child?
That's what I was about to say. So even the things that you perceive your mother-in-law does badly, poorly, or to the detriment of your children, that is your inner child screaming for you to own and love that part, as much as we'll move into mirror and perception next. But remember, that's not your child's experience, that's yours. And so when you see this adds greater opportunity for resilience, for learning, for adaptability, for potentially manipulation and communication skills, and for all of the versions of genius and connection that you can't offer because they're not part of your story, voids and values, I guarantee this woman will offer those in that form.
Yeah. And that's when you can really, and we'll get to this, but that's when you can really actually bow in gratitude for them, exactly who they are, without needing to change one thing, because you can see that they're giving your child exactly what your child needs.
Yes.
It's
really amazing. So maybe we'll move into mirror. What do we want to go? Well, we kind of touched on inner child before, but if you're kind of getting triggered, you need to take it two ways. So the mirror and perception kind of make it relevant right now to what's happening in you right now. And it also screams to your inner child, where has this belief or feeling started or come from? What's the base that's kind of sitting under there around the biggest challenge that you... you actually said this, Bridget. You said, okay, this is all like lots and lots and lots of issues that you're having with this mother-in-law. What's your biggest charge? You said break it down to the one thing to one of these women in our group. What's the biggest charge, the thing that irritates
charge,
you the
like,
most?
That's an emotional, the
biggest emotional...
within your body, that something will happen and you'll just immediately fire up in your body.
Yeah.
And what she said was being belittled.
Yes.
Wasn't it? Belittled.
I think that was what it was.
Yeah.
So then the story becomes...
And in fact, she'd actually said... I just, my whole childhood, I just felt that I was belittled and shamed. And so what we had to do then, is break that label. So, if you look at kids today, there's so many labels floating around all the time about what children are. And those labels become self-fulfilling, right? And the passage of time also means that we build a story around something that might have only been minuscule in the scheme of things of our life, but we build a story that makes it bigger than what it was. And so her story was quite huge around, her whole childhood was really clouded by this sense of feeling belittled or spoken down to or shamed by the adults around her, by her mother-in-law, by her grandmother. And so what you really want to do is go back and ask yourself to be certain that that's actually true and not just a story that you've built up over time.
So you start by, where is this happen? Where has this feeling come from for me? What's the context in my life that has this resonance?
Yeah.
And then you said you can't do a vague thing. This is where you're headed.
It can't be general.
Vague.
It can't be general because then it's just hearsay. Then it's just like, oh, I just felt that. You actually need to go back to the event. So you want to see, go back into your memories and go, okay, where was I? When was it? Who was there? And who directed it at me? So you actually need to place yourself in that moment so that you can be sure that, okay, that actually did happen. And then what you want to do, once you're quite certain, you want to ask yourself in the exact moment, who was supporting you, or who was celebrating you, or who was lifting you up? Because we're getting both support and challenge in every moment, but our senses allow us to only often see one side. And then we build that up to be bigger than Ben-Hur and negate the other side that was always there, but we didn't perceive it. And so what you do is you ask yourself, okay, where was I not belittled? And give yourself evidence of examples around that same time of who was supporting you and all those kinds of things. And what that does is it starts to break that memory association for you around being belittled or
around
being
the
shamed.
label that you were X.
Around the label.
Yeah.
And then what happens then is you free yourself from needing to be continually triggered by that, because you've equilibrated that perception that it was one-sided.
Yes. And so when we're doing that, you can't be vague. The point that you're really honing in on, you can't go, well, I just always felt like that, and that was always kind of happening for me in the background of, my childhood. It has to be very specific, or else it's a distorted memory, which is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, basically memories are lies in the sense that memories are stored in our brain for our purpose of our evolution. They're only there for us to go back and equilibrate at some point, which we will either do consciously through this kind of work, or it will happen unconsciously through the events.
And equilibrating is going back to the exact moment and seeing that, in fact, there was perfect harmony and balance there in challenge and support. And as soon as you do that, it's like, poof, that whole kind of story and perception that you've built up over your life disintegrates.
Yeah, and you bust your story, really.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we all have stories, and we could spend our whole life breaking apart our stories. And often we don't want to, because we become attached to our story. They make us feel comfortable.
Or they validate.
They validate our choices in life. They validate who we are. They validate how we define ourselves.
Yes.
But they also trap us.
Yes.
And when the story is the form of this mother-in-law, which is constantly triggering this woman, and really making life pretty miserable in terms of allowing her kids to grow into those relationships, it's calling her in to do this work. It's calling her in to go and ask these quality questions of herself. And so that's what we're doing here, and that's what we took her through. And we'll keep going. But
So mirror and perception. So we kind of touched on perception then, that our perception is, like we talked about in last week's podcast, is that idea that we all have a coloured filter based on whatever our wound is, and that's how we see or read that situation. And based on what each of us kind of is carrying in a wound, we read that same situation differently. So therefore there is no reality, everything's perception. So when you're saying your mother-in-law is X, Y, and Z, we're saying, why do you think that? Because it's not that she is, it's why do you think that?
It's just you simply seeing that in her.
Yes, and where has that come from for you? Because as soon as you bust those stories, like you just talked about then, those perceptions disappear or change. And
it's not that the mother-in-law is doing anything different, it's simply that you've just shifted your perception.
And your filter has therefore changed in how you're reading and seeing that situation. Now, the other flip is that whenever we're in a situation during our day, it's always an internal. Everything is about us. So don't ever think anything is outward projection on anyone else in this world. Everything you are reading and seeing and believing and feeling is a perception that's an internal kind of mechanism, registering, awakening, helping you to consciously be aware of what you're taking in all of those information formats. So the mirror works that whatever you are seeing is actually an internal reflection. So when you say your mother-in-law is X, Y, and Z, we're saying, okay, well, you're triggered by those things because you haven't brought them out of the shadows within yourself.
So where are you?
X, Y, and Z, in as greater intensity as she is. You will be exactly the same, just you've chosen to run from it, so you're running into it.
So, and I'm just picturing people listening here going, I am not like that. There's no way. And I know this happens because I sat next to a woman in, doing this work once a few years ago, and she almost walked out because she was not willing to own that she was as, you know, a narcissist to the degree that she saw her mother as. You know, because she built up such a story that her mother was this and she was this and they were nothing alike. You know, which was so emotionally draining and triggering for her. So the mirror can be really rough to own, but the truth is you can never speak anything than what you are, and you can never see anything than what you are, because the whole world is a reflection of the parts of you that you haven't yet loved or integrated.
Yes.
And that's when we can start to shift our patterning on other people doing this to us, or, you know, the outside world being to blame, and simply then going, okay, what is this trying to teach me about me? And every single interaction, every single moment can be a learning opportunity for you to become more whole.
Yes.
In essence.
Yes. So when you've really labelled what those things are, we're asking you to, one, go back into your childhood and bust those stories. 2, look at, in your mother-in-law's greatest or top values, where is she the opposite of those things? Where is she not that label that you've given her? And 3, where are you those things? So this is kind of the toolkit process we're asking you to work through. Then the other one I wanted to throw out there was kind of a bit more of an inner child that I guess is based, I really, like, this woman in our group was such a mirror for me on my childhood kind of experience with mother, or in inverted commas, you know, lack or absence of the mother archetype in the way that I perceived her to be. And I could see this playing out for this woman. So this idea of fantasies and nightmares you've heard us talk about, and when you chase a fantasy, the nightmare is breeding and chasing you to get you to see that nothing is just perfect and nothing is just shit, that there is there's
benefits and drawbacks in everything.
Yes, there's equality. There's equity? No, quality?
Equanimity.
Equanimity, that's it.
Yeah.
There's total harmony and balance in every situation, and that our evolution and growth is based on really reaching those points and seeing the perfection that's playing out and how that serves us and helps us grow. So what I had suggested to this woman, which was likely just me talking to me, which makes total sense, was that when you have grown up with an, in inverted commas, absent or destructive mother in some format, that you have in your mind kind of each time something's hurt or done wrong, you've built up a fantasy, this kind of perfect mother. Well, a good mother would do this. I really, like, if I had a good mother, here's who I would be. Here's what a mum would do. Or I look for, you know, I'm at a friend's house and I see a friend's mum do something. Oh, she's a good mum. That's what a good mum does. And it's like we've built up really this fantasy picture around what a perfect mother is. Now, this goes twofold, right? Because it feeds us in our story of hurt and pain and wound and victim, because our mother constantly is letting us down based on this fantasy, this pedestal
and
that we've created.
How could they not if you've got this fantasy person you're creating?
Yeah, totally. But the flip of this is the fantasy that I've created around a good mother is connected, interested, wanting to cook and nourish food, always around, whatever your list of things are. I just wonder whether your mother-in-law is literally the embodiment of those things, but she's getting you to see the nightmare that comes with that fantasy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's big.
And in seeing how, sure, you can have all of these really great qualities, but they come with this. And do you want that?
Yeah, so for instance, you know, the mother who's always present and around and holds space for her kids could also be really meddling.
Yes.
You know, and that's the...
Or opinionated.
Opinionated, or, you know, dogmatic about her way and dogmatic about the house rules, because if she's always there, she's always knows everything that's going on and she's probably in your business.
Yes.
So all of a sudden you have this fantasy. Here's the nightmare of that. Because there's benefits and drawbacks in those scenarios.
And isn't that perfect? Because essentially she's here trying to bust this fantasy that you've built a whole life story around. And does that in actuality, getting you to see that change, one, how you parent now, and 2, the gratitude you have for your own mother and childhood. And how perfect is that? And in essence, like, kiss the ground that this mother-in-law walks on for her bringing this into your life, because the love and the gratitude and the shifting that she is bringing in her very embodiment, which you have called in for sure, is so freaking perfect that you could just do, like, you just, well, Bridget and I sit on the other side and going, I just want to love them for that. Just,
And
extraordinary.
It shows the profoundness of when you shift your perceptions. And I think it was Wayne Dyer who said that, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. This is the work. This is the work of how to do that. This is taking that, oft bandied around quote and actually putting some systems and rigor around how to do it.
Yeah.
Because it can sound great in theory, but if you don't have the tools to be able to do it,
or if you're not going to spend the time doing it.
Yeah, if you're not going to go into the pain that's often there to do it. But, I'm sure that the women in this course who did that would say time and time again, oh my God, that was so worth it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and we were in tears reading their posts around after they'd had the next interaction with their mother-in-law, how profoundly different it was.
And because, our bodies, your body's a great feedback. Your body's your subconscious mind. So the sensations that you feel in your body are reflecting elements of your brain and your mind. And so she was saying that normally she's going there. There's a whole lot of apprehension about going. Yeah. She's there and she's kind of got this
tensed up ferocity kind of
ready to unleash. And then after she'd done this work, she's like, I wasn't triggered by anything.
I couldn't even. She was like, I just couldn't. I kept looking at her, going, "Wow, you're amazing." And she's like, "How did I never see this before?" Yeah. Like it was like this huge. All I could feel was just immense love and gratitude for the fact that she was in my kid's life rather than not a week or two earlier. Yeah, she was like that. I thought, oh my God, that
was really your story. Do you want to explain about the Mother's Day? What you did one Mother's Day?
Oh well, just this Mother's Day, look, this is huge work for me. My mother-in-law has been probably one of my biggest, well, next to my mother, which is quite funny, probably my biggest trigger, right, in my life. And I've been with my husband now for nearly 16 years. So that's 16 years I've known her in my life. That's a lot of time to be triggered by someone. But over the years, I've done this kind of work. In the last couple of years, probably last 3 years, immensely shifted to the point where I just... honestly, I think she's the bee's knees. Like, there's stuff she does that I go, part of me still wants to flip back to that fantasy idea, but I'm nowhere near as sucked into it, and I totally see her magnificence and the way in which she parents and mothers me and my children is just, it was so deeply painful, I think, for me to be mothered. So we talk about this fantasy idea of what the ideal mother is. And she was that, right? She intimately mothered her children. And so when she was trying to do that to me, it was so painful for me that I was kind of like...
Because you thought you wanted that. You'd spent, a decade probably wishing that your own mother was like
craving to be mothered, right? And yet here she was trying to do it, and I was like... fuck off. Because of my story, because I had never been mothered in that way. And it was so painful and felt claustrophobic and controlling, and so here's the nightmare in the fantasy, right? Which I had never had exposure to. And thank God, because that's kind of made my whole life story, right? In a way, the journey that I've gone on is perfect because of the mother that I had, and I'm immensely grateful for that. But it was so interesting to see what I thought was the perfect mother, in essence, actually I felt like crippled by. Which is so interesting. But at the same time, once I was able to kind of see that and move through that, it really started to awaken for me to be able to see a role model of what it was to mother. Because if you haven't been traditionally mothered, trying to be a mother is really hard. Like if you're talking about generational patterns on how to parent and mother and if you haven't had an excellent role model, how the fuck do you know what you're doing with your own kids? And so, hence, the huge learning curve that I went on and the choosing of natural parenting paths and the immense amount of research and courses and whatever that I did, which totally served me and everything, and therefore are perfect. But still comes back to, if you haven't ever been traditionally mothered, you have no kind of baseline on how to do that. So
you're looking for a toolkit.
I'm looking for a toolkit. And yet here she was with it. And I just this year felt like this, whenever I thought about her and what she... And I never had grandparents either. So having grandparents in my kids' lives was a really new scenario for me too. And what I realised with her was that I could just be brought to tears when I thought about the gratitude I had for how she had shown me what being a mother was and what being a grandmother was. And that I was so immensely grateful for the exposure to that, because I'd missed that. And yet here she was, and I had to fight through all my own inner child kind of before I could see
the love that was there.
I'm like, I could seriously cry now when I think about, pained actually to start off with, because I can't believe I never saw that in all of these. But it's perfect I didn't, because I had to work through so many layers of my own inner child that she was bringing up for me, or that I was reacting to when we talk about perception and mirror and going back and da-da-da-da. So many layers, like 10 years of layers trying to work through all of my inner child mothering kind of stuff that she was reflecting to me. Where now I just look at her and she hasn't changed, but now I look at her and I go, like just what I never had exposure to as a child, you have exposed me to. And I'm so grateful that that's there for my kids. And I'm so grateful that I get to see that. And so in this year's Mother's Day card, I wrote her a note and just kind of said, I'm really grateful. What did I say? I can't remember now. But essentially just I wanted to say a really deep thank you for showing me what it was to be a mother and showing me what it was to be a grandmother. And that has immensely changed my life and my kids' lives. And I could see her welling up with tears when she wrote it, which which, kind of emotion under the rug kind of person that she is, and got on with things. But just witnessing that, I thought, that's amazing that she feels validated by me in her highest value and that I had never given that to her.
And isn't gratitude the greatest healer? And when you're saying that, it really speaks to me. It really puts the essence behind the quote from Rumi, which is, at first I was clever and I wanted to change the world. Now I am wise, so I'm changing myself.
So true.
Because that's what this is, right? Like, no one ever needed to change.
Yeah.
You just need to change your perception. And that, in fact, we have such a distorted view, most of us, in terms of what love is. But this is the truth of love, that everything is love, because it's that synthesis of both of that support and challenge that we're not privy to seeing the wholeness of. We're so polarised in our perceptions based on our own values of how things should be that we don't see that full picture, but it was always there.
It was always there, right? There. And how did I feel like, in some essence, like kicking younger self me up the arse and going, what the fuck? How can you not even see that? But it's perfect that I didn't. Yeah, I know that. I know that.
And you and I have been doing that this week on we look back on our, earlier approaches to parenting, and particularly our, obsession with attachment parenting. And now, I want to kick myself in the head.
Yeah, I know.
But that's growth, right? We are always evolving. We're climbing these spheres of awareness, and when you kind of, equilibrate your illusion and you reach the next sphere, you can kind of look back at yourself and go, who was that person?
It's so true, isn't it?
And that's life.
And yet perfection in those, because you could never have got to that next evolution or that next layer or that next depth of understanding had you not, one, had the trigger, and two, found the tools to get through it.
And the important part is to love that, right? So, if you
love the journey.
If you're judging yourself as an idiot or whatever for something, what were the benefits to you in that? What were the benefits? We wouldn't have this podcast if both didn't go down that path.
Totally.
So it is all perfect. But it's easy with our growing wisdom to judge our past choices, which you can never do because you're only ever living in your values.
Yeah. So great.
Yeah.
So I really hope that you have really got some sort of insight into your own application of your mother-in-law in your life and perhaps your own mother in your life and how you operate as a mother even. And that you have some tools out of this to really start applying to create massive shift in your life. And if you are a little bit confused on any of this, if you have a specific question that you would like us to address, we really love doing that. And in fact, you know, we really want to do more of that, because in our course, that's what worked really well. There was a question, and if they were really in depth, we would do a video answer, and it was just for learning purposes.
Yeah,
was extraordinary.
And I mean, we talked about the mirror. Well, the mirror that being in a group offers is profound, because so often the same issues for somebody will be showing up in another person. So even if we're answering that person's question,
it will apply to so many.
Yeah, it'll apply to so many. So certainly, even if you feel like it's just your issue, quite often it'll be, you know, playing out for
everyone's issue.
Too. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So please Facebook us or message us, or get in contact with us on www.nourishingthemother.com.au. Please rate this podcast on iTunes. It keeps it kind of staying in iTunes. If you have 5 seconds, that'd be super duper. And to connect with you, Bridget?
It's suburbansandcastles.com. And you, Jules?
thepleasurenutritionist.com. And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.